Hi, welcome to Head Start, the podcast for race directors and the business of putting on races. It's probably fair to say that when it comes to a race director's calendar, it doesn't get much bigger than race day. It's the day your race comes alive and a day you and your team have been working towards for months. Whether it's your first race or your 100th, everyone goes into race day a bit like a stand-up comedian walking on stage for their first gig, with a mix of excitement and, well, dread is probably a good word for it. A million things are going through your head. Does everyone know what they have to do? Are things going to be in place? Are we going to run on schedule? And what do I do if this or that happens? Today, I have the pleasure of being joined on the podcast by Chris McDonald, a race director and timer with more than 1,000 races under his belt. Chris is also Run Sign-Up's race day expert, and as such has been training race directors and timers on what to expect on race day and how best to prepare for all the curveballs a live event might throw at you. Our chat with Chris lasted for close to 2 hours, and I can tell you there's tons of hard-earned wisdom in those 2 hours to help you take your race day prep to the next level. So stick with us and keep coming back to this episode when you feel you could use a quick refresher. Before we go into the episode, a quick shout out to our podcast sponsor, Give Sign Up Run Sign Up, the leading all-in-one technology solution for endurance and fundraising events. More than 22,000 in-person, virtual, and hybrid events use Give Sign Up Run Sign Up's free and integrated solution to save time, grow their events, and raise more. Thank you to our friends at Give Sign Up Run Sign Up for supporting this podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about how amazing technology can transform all aspects of your race, make sure to visit runsignup.com. If you're a regular listener and you enjoy the podcast, please make sure to subscribe on your favorite player and do leave us a review. Every single one of them means a great deal to everyone working on this podcast. Okay, let's get into this amazing episode. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. I think I should say that, strictly speaking, this is probably your second time on the podcast. I think we had you on our Bluetooth timing episode for a very short interview on race day scoring, right?
Yes.
So today, we're going to be covering a lot of very interesting ground, I hope. We're going to be talking about the most important day, probably, on any race director's calendar, which is race day, and how to make sure that people go into race day prepared and they have a smooth and successful race. From your experience, we're going to be touching on a lot of very interesting practical tips on that. Before we go into all that, I think we're going to need some introductions about yourself. So tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, Go Race Productions, and also your involvement with Run Sign Up as the race day expert.
I'm the owner and head timer of Go Race Productions. We're a full-service event timing and event production company on the East Coast of the U.S., and we time, produce, consult with around 80 to 120 events a year, and have been in the industry actively producing races since 2008 and in the industry since 2003 with another company. And we do all types of events, from your small local 5K to 15,000 person national size events. We specialize in triathlon, but also do everything top to bottom, from regattas to corporate events. And then I also help out on the Run Sign Up team as the race day expert, where I help train new timers on the race day products. And so with that, I actually have a lot of communication with hundreds of timers across the US. And a number of these folks, we bounce ideas off of each other. And so best practices get shared quite frequently. So I think on my end, we probably have a pretty good idea of what the average race is doing. Obviously, there are anomalies where they have to have very specific setups or timelines or things. But for the average event, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on with having been involved with over probably 1,000 events at this point.
And as part of your work with Run Sign Up recently, you also spend a lot of time training race directors and timers and talking to race directors and timers about the kinds of best practices that we're going to be going into today. And I think it's fair to say, from what I hear from a friend of mine that runs SignUp, Race Day Expert is your official tag, but
yes,
I think you're known by a different name as well, aren't you?
I think someone called me a ninja, I think, and
yes, Race Day Ninja is what
yeah.
I've heard. What I've heard people call you. Okay, that's going to be really helpful today. I think we can use the skills of a ninja here, because
Right.
Navigating Race Day is a tricky thing. It's sort of like the culmination of a race director's efforts and their team's efforts over several months. So what I want us to focus on today is, races take a long time to produce and to plan. And there's things that you need to do before race day, like put your orders in and insurance and permits and all kinds of stuff. And I don't want us to focus so much on that, because, that's the kinds of things that, people probably do. I want us to focus on the kinds of things that can go wrong and can be avoided around race day, best practices around race day, and then starting maybe a little bit before race day, but again, with a focus on the kinds of things that are specifically pertinent to making sure race day is a success. So starting before race day, I wanted to look at a couple of things. First of all, lots of people go into race day having tried out very few things, having done very few experiments around even things like how the event site is going to work and how the start and finish line is going to work. So, like some people just have made some plan on paper, and then they show up on race day and they start putting stuff up. And then, you do that on race day, sometimes things don't work. So from your point of view, looking ahead to race day, what are some good things to keep in mind for race directors around planning their event site and their start and finish line, so they can sort of avoid some of the common headaches people face when they actually go into race day trying to do that for the first time?
Sure. So, it goes without saying, but over planning goes a long way to mitigate issues on site for race day. Over communicating, over planning, and having support to help you with every aspect of the race. As the race director, your job on race day is nothing almost. You should just be the conductor of the orchestra. The conductor's not playing an instrument, they're playing the orchestra. And so as the race director, you're in that same spot. You shouldn't, in theory, you shouldn't be putting out turn signs. You shouldn't be setting up tents. You shouldn't be out on course. You likely aren't checking people in, and this does shift with the size and scope of the event. So smaller events, 100-person 5K, you might be doing all of those things. I would strongly advise against it. If you're the race director, maybe you're helping with some part of packet pickup or training people in packet pickup. You might have the day before gone out and pre-marked the course, but the for your event day to be a success, having people or leads in those positions that you can count on, so that your brain space, your bandwidth is not eaten up by things that aren't big picture, is really important. So having a volunteer lead, having a packet pickup lead, having a course lead, having a start finish line lead, having a timing lead. All of these things are really important. And even in a 100-person event, your course lead might be one person that has one other person with them, and they manage all of it. And it's not that big of a deal for your 5K. You put out, a handful of cones, 25 signs, a couple aid stations, no big deal. And so when we talk about these leads, we're not talking about an army of people. Now, you shift over to a mid-major marathon. Yeah, your course lead is going to be very similar to a small race director, or even a big race director. They're going to be coordinating large teams of people doing lots of different things. And they're going to have other people that are underneath them, aid station leads, cone leads, things like that. So making sure that you have those people that you can count on, that are aware and understand what their jobs are on site, and that have a clear line of communication with you on race day is imperative. So, and that way, if they have people underneath them, they're the point of contact for those people. That way, you're not getting, as the race director, even for a 100-person 5K, you're not getting calls from 15 different people. You might be getting calls from 4 or 3 or texts. Texts work a lot better because you can get multiple texts from multiple people at the same time. So that would be a starting point. Also, in terms of race site and flow and things like that, both having maps, overhead maps that you can diagram how you see things going, and then taking those maps out, physically going to the race site with those maps. A lot of times we'll take cones to kind of get a visual of where the expectation of, the finish line or the start line. And for a number of events, the backdrop, the finish line photo is like a key point. And making sure that you placing the finish line in that specific point for that picture doesn't bottleneck other parts of the course. Or, are people having to walk across the finish line to get to the start line from packet pickup? And is that going to be a problem? So really looking at what the flow is going to be. And again, that changes significantly with size of event, because with a 100-person 5K, you can usher 100 people across a parking lot in a matter of a few minutes. A 5,000-person event, you're likely going to have corrals, waves. You're going to move people over in groups. They're going to start at specific times. And so it really changes the way your flow for the morning and your flow for your athlete management, it changes significantly.
Some great points there. I want to return to the whole to the very important issue of delegation and team leads in a sec, because I think that's definitely a key part of success on race day. With regards to the race site, from experience, are there things that people should think about having set up prior to race day? Like how do you keep a good balance between not doing much on race day, but then making sure, for instance, you don't do things before race day on the course, setting up the site, that are going to be like a waste of time because they're either not going to work, or they might change, or they might be liable to people moving them around.
Right. That actually goes back to that delegation side too, because the more people you have, the more you can get done in a shorter amount of time. So if you only have one person to help you on course, and I hope this is not the case, but you're doing a marathon, number one, you're short staffed. Number two, that person is going to have to start much, much earlier to complete their task. There's also issues with your permits. So if your permits say that the roads aren't going to be closed until, 45 minutes before the race, you really can't build out structure on the road until that happens. You can't just say, well, I'm here, I'm going to shut this down because I feel like it. Granted, if you're in a small town, maybe they don't mind as much. You can just cone yourself off. But the reality is, if anything were to happen and your permit says that, you don't have access to do that, then you could be held liable, which obviously you don't want to happen. A lot of times we'll request for the ability to shut down the roads somewhere around 3 hours ahead of time for a medium-sized event. That gives us plenty of time to build out a finish line. Now, for a large event, you're going to likely need, hours and hours. If you're building out, 8-meter wide, 12-meter wide truss structure with Coro and stuff like that, and barricades, again, you're going to have a team of people working on different parts, but it does take time. And most of those instances, you're starting to set up your finish line area, 1 or 2 a.m. for for an 8 a.m. start because it's going to take 6-7 hours of X amount of people working. So you start looking at man hours. How many man hours is this going to take to complete? And back that out for how many people you have. Because if it's going to take 20 man hours to do, if you've got 20 people, maybe it only takes an hour, hour and a half. But if you're by yourself, it's going to take you a day. So you can start doing calculations on how long it's going to take for some of these things to happen. But yeah, in terms of setting things up in advance, like obviously your course certification will not be happening day of. So that will happen, weeks or months prior if it's not already a pre-certified course. And then a number of people will go pre-mark if, like, say, marking chalk is allowed. They'll pre-mark the day before or the evening before as there's less traffic on the roads. And that way, when they get there on site, they can just put out signs, cones, and aid stations.
You mentioned there that, it's a good practice always to try and calculate in advance how many people you're going to need to make sure all the tasks that are ahead of you are, properly staffed. When you do those kinds of calculations, would you give yourself some kind of margin of error? Like, I've seen a lot of people like being caught up in, very strictly doing, man-hour divisions and stuff like that. And then something goes wrong and they're off by like 20-30%. Do you advise on including some kind of margin for things taking longer or, unexpected stuff popping up?
We don't do specific man-hour calculations. We have good estimations for each task that we normally do on events and how long each will take. So for, a 5K course, if we have this many turn signs, we know it's going to take these 2 people or these 3 or 4 people this amount of time, and they are gone. We will not see them. And so that margin of error can get reabsorbed because unless you're just doing a horrible job of underestimating everything, if you're underestimating some things, you're probably overestimating others. And so keeping everyone on the same page that the end goal for all is not to complete your task. The end goal for all is to have a successful event. And so if, for instance, let's say the barricades are done 30 minutes early and the truss is running late, like the people helping with, your volunteers helping with the barricades can go help with the truss. Like we try to share out all of the tasks and all of the times. So everyone has a good understanding of not just their responsibility, but everyone's responsibility or a general overview of everyone's responsibility. So with the idea that if they complete their task early, go help someone else. Don't sit down. It's not, you can sit down after the race is over, or if it's like an ultra event or a long distance event, you're going to have downtime. But that pre-event setup, that's rarely the downtime that you have. Like a lot of, say, Olympic distance triathlons. Once most people are out on the bike, there's a lull. Definitely in half iron distance races when everyone's on the bike, or in a marathon once everyone started and the flow is going. At that point, everyone is on course, and so your start finish people, there's still work to be done, but that acute stress from setup and getting things going has decreased slightly.
That's a really great tip, actually. So basically, you're saying that everyone knows what they have to do, and of course, having some kind of specialization is important. You have your volunteer lead and all the different people. You set up the course, you do the start finish area and everything. But as you say, it's really important for everyone to also keep an eye on the big picture. So if you need to share resources across those tasks, it's possible to do so. Is that also to say then that when you train all of those people, or when you communicate before the race what they have to do, you sort of brief them all as a team so that everyone sort of knows what the bigger picture is around the tasks for the event?
Yeah, the team leads would get that sort of information. So the specific volunteers, like if there's an aid station volunteer or something like that, they're not necessarily going to get trained on packet pickup, for instance. The leads would all get trained That way, the lead for that other area could then kind of give a brief overview, because rarely is it people being brought in to wholly manage something that they don't know what they're doing. It's they're going to support people already doing it to help, catch up. And that happens a lot with the packet pickup, where, lines are starting to form or something like that. And you need to scale packet pickup quickly. And so someone that might not have been involved with the early packet pickup process, like how to process, gets added to. Now, they're not expected to know everything. They might now be in charge of something like handing out a shirt, which is, not a challenging task conceptually. So, hey, I need a small. They can pick up, the smalls are over there. It's something that they can quickly and easily be trained on, and they're not expected to know everything top to bottom. So those team leads are kind of the ones that ideally, or in a lot of our scenarios, we have staff as those leads. And so our staff are trained on all parts.
I guess for you guys who put on a large number of events, some of them sort of around the same area, do you find that volunteers who work on events more than once, sort of like the veterans, they're a lot more productive and they're a lot more confident and able to carry on, to carry out different types of stuff, the more races they attend and work on?
Sure. And a lot will go to other people's events too and say, well, this is, sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. This is how we did it with so-and-so. And they can bring a lot of value to the table with having other experiences. You can also have to break some habits that you don't implement at your events. But yeah, I mean, we definitely see volunteers as a whole that are doing volunteering at multiple races a year. They definitely step in and step up more easily. We found that instead of giving race shirts to volunteers, we've actually started giving our company specific volunteer shirts to volunteers. That way they can be reused for other events. And so we have less cost associated with that. And it's also brand management for our team. But it also makes them feel like they're a part of our team. Because they are, like, without question, they're a part of our team. And we wouldn't be able to put on races without those volunteers.
That's another great tip. So one of the things, speaking of volunteers, that I hear people talk a lot around with frustration is that sometimes, you go into a race, you have on paper, like 100 volunteers signed up. Then come race day, like 65 show up, and then you're in a real pickle because where are you going to find 35 people, particularly if you haven't provisioned for having some margin of error again in that. So going into race day, is there any kind of like clever tactics or communications you can employ to make sure that that dropout rate, that no-show rate from your volunteer team is as low as possible?
Volunteer leads are a great resource, especially if you have one singular point of contact that might be like a president of an organization. Like, finding individual volunteers can come and go a lot easier. Granted, when an individual volunteer out of 100 doesn't show up, you're down to 99. And so it's not as painful versus like an entire volleyball team not showing up to volunteer. And now you're down to 80. And this is from personal experience. So it happens, but having a really good relationship with that coach or with that organizer of that group, and also incentivizing the group to be there. I think most events would agree that they are making donations on behalf of the volunteer group, to help encourage those groups to come in. I know that there are a number of other organizations that have to have a set number of volunteer hours. So being able to provide those volunteer hours in a very compact way that they can be a part of the event and all get signed off at the same time is really nice for a lot of those groups. So just reinforcing that this is our procedure for your volunteer time card sign-offs. And then a number of other people have competition within the event for the volunteer groups. And you could get creative. We've done vote by athlete as to the, say, like best dressed aid station. And each aid station is, in quotation marks, sponsored by this volunteer group. And so they come out and get crazy. And it does bring a lot more hype to the event, because now you've got a whole nother group bringing energy in for a whole nother purpose, and, presenting some sort of award or an additional donation for that group that wins. Again, incentivizing them to really engage with the event. All in all, it makes the event experience for everyone, the volunteers, the athletes, and the event itself, because they're getting more exposure for it. It elevates all aspects. So it does mean that your volunteer coordinator is going to need to be more prepared, more active. And so it's not just going to happen. That scenario that I just spoke of, it doesn't just magically happen by itself. So if you go to an event and see that happen, someone on the back end has worked very, very hard to put that sort of encouragement out there to the volunteers.
Yeah, but there's basically, in what you're saying, I think some really concrete tips there for people to follow. I think particularly what you said around, essentially making volunteers. I mean, first of all, drafting them from groups and organizations definitely helps, because, those people have their own internal structures and hierarchies, right? You don't need to have individuals and train every single one. But also what you said about taking ownership of those aid stations, taking ownership of all of those bits in the race, so they can take pride in saying, this aid station is supported by, us, whatever. And it's a different kind of ball game when you do that. I think it would definitely help people show up. And if they're part of a different organization, there's this whole peer pressure of them showing up, because, when the race is over, they still need to go away and do other stuff. And, they'll be, hey, Kate, like, why didn't you show up? Or like John or whatever, like, what happened kind of thing. So it's a different kind of like peer pressure atmosphere in there, I guess.
That can go the other way too. Positive recognition goes a long way as well. So being able to say, in advance, like on social media or what have you, Boy Scout Troop, blah, 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 is, we appreciate them being out here or coming out this weekend to help support our great cause. And then after, recognizing them on site, and then after the fact, if you're doing a check presentation or something like that, pointing out that not only, yes, they were there, let's also thank them, but this is how the event is benefiting them too. And so it really just, again, like brings back this event is doing a lot for the community outside of just completing, 5K or whatever your race is. It's making an impact with other organizations that are helping, either promote sport or providing moral compass to, our youth or what have you. So it just brings the event back into your community. And it's a really important part, especially if you're trying to drive more registrations and more volunteers, is showing how much you're doing for the community.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's one of those things, thanking people after the event that is so often overlooked, and it can be so massively effective without costing you anything, or, without having to, take up too much of your time or anything. Just acknowledging all the people, the volunteers, all the different organizations by name that go into the event, the local authorities who help out, every single person in there. It's such a massive incentive for them to keep coming back and keep supporting the event. I think people should absolutely never forget to do that.
Right.
One other interesting carve out in what you were saying there was that some volunteer groups come in with a requirement to do some mandatory volunteer work, to basically have some volunteer hours. That's an interesting carve out for people who are looking to recruit volunteers. What kind of groups would those be, so that people can reach out to them for to beef up their volunteer teams?
Contacting local high schools and colleges. So the high schools usually have National Honor Society, Beta Club. There's other, sometimes sports teams require those volunteer hours. A great place within the colleges and universities are the Panhellenic Council and fraternities. And that can be very effective. They can get very, very excited about being involved, and it can be very popular. You can also have trouble with some of those groups. You have to be honest with yourself when you say, all right, we're going to ask these people to be on site on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. And so sometimes it's a little harder for
college students.
A college student, especially if they had like a Friday night game or something like that might have encouraged them to stay out a little later than they should have. We were all there, so we understand. But you do need to be honest with yourself about the possibility of some of those groups not showing up. So we run into that a lot less with the high school groups. However, the high school groups, you have the chaperone situation and things like that. Like you don't, the rules are different in different places, but a lot of times it's 16. Some places it's 18 in terms of who can volunteer on, like, as a directional volunteer on a corner by themselves. And so you need to work out with both their coordinator and with your local rules and regulations. So you're not putting, in no time do you need to have a child on a corner by themselves without a chaperone. That's, not how things need to go. And a lot of times with younger volunteers, we do put multiple, 18-year-olds, we might have two there, so that in the instance that they need to, make a phone call or anything happens, so they just have a little bit of backup. With adults, even in college, you don't have the same requirement necessarily, but therein your college students are maybe not as keen to show up early for an event.
Yeah, you have all those other risks, I guess, right. with college students, which are always understandable. As you said, we've all been there. So
there's nothing against college students. We did the same thing when we were that age. So you just have to be honest with yourself.
Exactly. So moving on to other things, preparing for race day. So protocols, contingencies, contingency planning, emergency planning, what ifs. What kinds of things should I go into race day armed with? Do I need to have an emergency plan? Do I have to have contingency planning for, what if that happens? What if the other thing happens? What's a reasonable balance of stuff that I should have thought through and prepared for and documented, like formally documented going into race day?
Emergency plans are a must. Any race that tried to happen in 2020 learned very quickly that having a contingency plan in place is mission critical. And obviously in some places in the US right now, things are shutting back down or haven't opened back up. And so permits are being applied for, yet things aren't open. And so with the hope that when the event day gets there, they will actually be able to hold the event. And so I know a lot of events, and at Run Sign Up, we've talked about this a lot over the past 18 months. And that is going with a hybrid event approach so that you have both in-person and virtual options. Most people are targeting the in-person registration, but with the caveat that if for some reason the event needs to be canceled, we still have the ability to pivot over to the virtual event. You'll still get your shirt. We'll still do the donations to the nonprofit, still do everything else. We have Run Sign Up provides a lot of great tools for, tracking and scoring and things like that. And so it does allow for those athletes to get value out of something that is virtual, like physical, tangible value. So that's a great starting point in terms of if the event, if the event is actually going to physically happen or not. And people have said, cancellation proof. It's not necessarily that. It's just keeping people engaged with the event and removing that stress of are we still going to participate in this thing? We are going to participate. It's just how are we going to participate? Are we going to be there in person or not? Obviously, a lot of events are happening in person. And so the emergency management plan does need to be in place. And this could be as simple as making sure you have an EMS unit on site, or having a physician or a nurse on site with some basic medical supplies. The event type can dictate what you have. For instance, if it's the middle of the summer and you're doing a half iron distance triathlon or a marathon, you're probably going to need a lot of bags of saline there for dehydration, and maybe a handful of scrapes. So, and broken bones, things like that. Possibly, I mean, you do plan for the worst, but the way I look at it as a race director is going back to putting people in place. I'm not a medical professional. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to find one that can be that lead, and we're going to lean on their experience and their knowledge. And I can provide them with historic data for things that we've experienced at these races, because if they've never been to, say, a 5K, all right, what do we expect at a 5K? Well, do we need saline bags? Probably not. Are we going to see cuts and bruises? Potentially. Things can happen out of the ordinary, but having that plan in place is a great starting point. We try to have EMS unit on site at every event, and making sure that EMS unit, like your emergency plan is the EMS unit is going to park in this place, and this is their direct line out of the event space, and being able to get them out quickly. And so that's your standby unit that you're paying for, or you're getting donated. Obviously, 911 is there for a reason. Even if you have an on-site EMS unit, it doesn't mean that if you have an incident on course, that on-site unit might not be the one responding. They might actually have a plan in place on their end that they're going to call in a response unit in, so they don't leave their post at the start-finish area. As events grow in size, the scope of your emergency plan increases a lot. We have events where we have 2 different life flight landing locations for helicopters, mobile field hospitals. It's just preparing for the worst, because the worst can happen. And if you're not ready for it, then obviously things go very, very poorly. And as much as you can prepare, things can still go wrong. So the best you can do as a race director is prepare as much as possible. Like if you're doing a 5K, you don't need a lifeguards on site. That makes sense. But if you're putting people in the water, having safety boats and lifeguards is very, very important. If you're doing a cycling race, you're going to focus on very specific types of injuries that come along with cycling. And you're going to make those people on site in charge of medical acutely aware of what to expect. If they don't believe you, you can just turn on, the Giro or the Tour or something like that, and they can watch what happens during those races, and then they'll believe you that it can actually happen. And then having a communication schedule, handing that out to your volunteer leads. A lot of times people will make lanyards with like a name badge or what have you on the front for the person. And then a timeline at the top of the back and a emergency contact list at the bottom. And that way you don't necessarily have to go through the emergency plan with every single volunteer. Instead, they now have a contact list of, if somebody's going to drop out, that's not an emergency, but you do have a contact point to let the timer or the race director know. And maybe it's just they text the bib number, 123 is dropped out at mile 15. And so there might be a SAG wagon or a meeting point for those people to be pulled from course and transported back to the to the start finish area. It's very important to have those plans in place. Those plans are as diverse as events themselves. But it is very, very important to have plans. And the beauty of those plans is if the event doesn't change much year over year, your plan's likely not going to need to change much year over year. It is something that you want to review with those teams that you have in place so that everybody's on the same page with what the expectation is. Like, again, we do a lot of multi-sport. And so we have an extraction point on the beach where a jet ski or, boat would bring someone in. And for some of those situations, it might just be, they didn't feel like they could complete the swim. In other situations, it might mean that they need medical support. And so that's where our EMS at the beginning of the race is waiting. And that way they can transport directly to the EMS unit and leave. Again, it changes wildly with events, but it is very important to have in place.
So I want to touch on a little bit. That's a very interesting point you made. I want to skip forward a little bit into actual race day stuff. You mentioned there briefly what volunteers would supposedly do if someone drops out. And that's something that actually people, we had a couple of posts on that in our Facebook group the other day, particularly for, I guess, not road races, but like trail running races, mountain marathons, really, really tough events. But probably even for road races, I guess, it's really important to have a process in place to make sure that people who drop out are properly accounted for, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to know that, person, like bib 1, 2, 3, 4 that didn't cross the finish line, didn't cross it for a reason that you can actually account for. And they're not, injured in a ditch somewhere.
Right. And the longer the event, the more likely something like that can happen. We've done trail ultras before, and we set up checkpoints along the way. And as much as I'm a timer and would love to throw mats and timing equipment on the ground and make this super official, the reality is in a lot of those locations, it just doesn't work out because you're well out of cell phone range. You don't have satellite communication there. And so we've actually had situations where we have a tent, volunteers, and they quite literally have printouts of the participant list, and they mark when and what time those people came through, and then they have ham radios that they would communicate back in a relay type scenario, not like running relay, but like a radio relay, so that the start finish area is aware that these people have met these checkpoints. And so at checkpoint 1, it might be less of bib number 1, 2, 3, and it might be more of just a count, because the likelihood of somebody dropping out on a 40-mile mountain trail run in the first 3 miles is pretty low. But at mile like 25, where people are coming in much, much slower, and not in groups of 25 or 30, it's more of okay, bib number 1, 2, 3 is through this point. And that way, and it's very manual, but it's effective. And it also allows those same volunteers usually have access to contact support. And in most of those scenarios, we try to have a trailhead somewhere nearby periodically so that if we needed to extract someone, we could. So, yeah, I mean, when you get out into the wilderness, it does become increasingly more challenging. I know a number of events have started using tools like RaceJoy to track athletes along the course, because they connect to GPS and then they backfill the GSM data or the data through GSM as it comes through. So sure, they might drop out for a period of time, but it does allow you to put checkpoints along the course, all electronically. Obviously the problem is you do need people running with their phones and having battery backup. I think it was I want to say Alaska Man that had people just way in the middle of nowhere, but they required everyone to carry a battery backup and use the app. And so they were able to track people through the wilderness at all times. And it was a very effective way of managing those people out on course.
Okay, so in terms of contact details that a race director needs to have in hand going into race day, like his own personal Rolodeck, what kinds of things should he have? Should he have like a liaison with the police, a liaison with EMS? Like, what should be on his kind of like personal contact list?
Yep. So the leads of each one of those are great. So if you do have different teams, so we have a lot of different longer events that run through multiple jurisdictions, and so a police lead might not be only a singular contact point. So if you leave a city and go into a county, you might shift from your local city's traffic control department where you have your lead, and then you go into the sheriff's deputy, who's the lead out in the county. And if you're going through multiple cities and counties, obviously you're going to have those throughout. And then you're going to have your EMS or on-site safety lead. You're going to have your lifeguard, depending on again what type of event you're doing. Your lifeguard lead, and then I usually try to keep a contact at the local hospital. It's just me personally, depending on the event size. Now, if it's a 5K, maybe not, but bigger event, a lot of times we'll reach out and touch base with the local hospital just so they can triage faster. Because if they know, like a half marathon is going on or a marathon, they'll be better equipped or possibly faster equipped to handle whatever might happen. They usually have a pretty good idea of what to expect from any medical event happening on event. So yeah, and then it's also not a bad idea to have a contact from the city planner's office or city manager's office in case you need public works to do something. A lot of times they're providing cones or barricades, or maybe letting the meter maids know that they're not supposed to ticket this parking lot for this period of time. It's not so much an emergency response, but it is something that can create chaos very quickly when you've rented an entire parking lot and magically all your athletes are getting parking tickets that aren't supposed to. Just having a short list in a Google Doc or something like that you and your team can share is very helpful.
And then on the flip side of that, who should I make sure has my contact details on race day?
All the team leads, all of those. Basically, if you've got their number, they need to have your number. The beauty of that is, in most scenarios, the people coming out through the permitting agencies have your contact info from your permit itself. So if you are the primary contact, then leave it as is and touch base with them. Make sure that a week or two in advance or a day or two in advance, and make sure that they know that you're the point of contact on site. If you're delegating that out, making sure that they both have your contact info in case they need to escalate, but also have the other person's contact info. That's the lead for like a safety lead or something like that. That they have that information. So and usually at larger events, you might have like a command center or something like that that's has all the tracking data of all the athletes, the timing information. Likely has an athlete database. Also has a contact list of all leads, and then you would also have radio communications around the entirety of the event. Now, this is not your normal small 5K, but when you kind of graduate up to those mid majors, those mobile communication links are really important. And having usually your city, county, something like that has like a bus or something that they can bring in and help manage communication around a large area. And they should have everyone's contact information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Well, one other thing that is notoriously volatile, I guess, going into event planning is the weather. There have been cases where weather has really caught people out quite dramatically a day or two before the event. What can a race director do to, keep on top of weather changes or anticipate or plan around, like severe weather striking out of sudden?
Well, obviously, we plan, but we just have to kind of go with the flow. We are a passenger on that train. However, communicating clearly to both athletes and all of the teams that are involved in advance is very, very important. And letting athletes know and continuing on that communication plan. So I live in a coastal area. We experience hurricanes. And so anytime there's a named storm during our race season, we start that communication plan. It might be Facebook, it might be email, but we stay with that communication plan. That way, otherwise, as a race director, you're going to get calls nonstop. Are we doing this? Are we doing this? Are you watching this? As soon as you start getting those calls, that's when you need to start implementing this plan. Actually, before that, ideally, but if you begin getting those calls, you need to begin communicating out what your plan is, because one person might contact you, but in reality, that probably means 10 or 100 are curious. It goes a long way to get that information out. So even making the statement, we are monitoring the weather as it develops. We're still 21 days out. There's no way for us to know what's going to happen on site right now. We will make sure to keep you informed as more information comes available. And okay, now you've started that communication. And so a few days later, just checking back in. There have been no new updates. We're continuing on as planned. Please stay tuned. We will make announcement. We'll 2 or 3 days from now, we'll make an additional announcement, and just keeping on that so that everyone knows. And then being in personal contact with, again, all of those agencies. For instance, if your start finish area is flooded, coming up with a plan as fast as possible to shift that into a place that's not flooded. Or the funny thing is, what happens more than weather is, a DOT crew will go out and grind up or shut down a road, and you show up on site, and now you have that issue. So being able to quickly shift the course as needed, all of this is still going back to that communication plan. It's changing your normal plan to a new plan B, or at this point, it might be plan C or D. But communicating that out so that everyone knows these changes, that you are aware that a change needs to be made, and that this is the plan of attack to change that.
Speaking of weather, actually, I'm quite curious to get your professional opinion, having been doing this for such a long time, on cancellation insurance. We had like an actual full podcast episode on that. I think it was actually the first episode of the podcast on race cancellation, and it was mostly based on the experience people have now with COVID, which brought all of those issues to the fore. But more generally, like the discussion there was that going forward, COVID may not be such a big issue, particularly hopefully in years to come, but severe weather still, as you were mentioning, hurricanes and all of that stuff, will continue to be an issue. Do you see value in people exploring the options of race cancellation insurance for things like that?
Absolutely. We've had to cancel several events due to hurricanes previously. Or actually, I don't know if I've never fully canceled an event. I rescheduled events due to hurricanes. Now that I think about it, I have a number of friends, especially in the triathlon world, that have had to cancel events. And if you are considering getting event cancellation insurance, and you do live in coastal areas, it is something that you will want to do well in advance. And the reason being, if you go and get event cancellation insurance, almost all insurance writers say that you are not covered under a named storm if it's already named. So, because at that point, it's already known that it is a storm. So in most scenarios, that means 2 or 3 weeks out, because that system is rolling off of Africa. And if they begin to track that and name it, and your event is subsequently canceled because of it, and I am not an insurance agent, I just know that there have been issues with this. So if you're on the fence, especially this time of year, I mean, it's the height of hurricane season right now. I think there's 4 active systems in the Atlantic presently. Getting that insurance early is important if you are moving that direction. Now, for those of whom that aren't affected as much by hurricanes and it's just severe weather, I don't know if it matters as much, but I'm sure if that system's already building across the US, then you would have a harder time filing a claim. But I do know a very good friend of mine had an event canceled due to a hurricane, and it was fully paid out. And so it worked out very, very well for them. They were potentially going to lose hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and everything was paid out. So we also at most of our events offer individual insurance, event insurance, and that allows for people that have things that might come up, like whether it be work or what have you, any other reason, injury, that they can file their own insurance claim and get refunded.
As we wrap up our chat on preparing for race day and moving into race day itself, you'll be hearing a few things about race day registration, managing packet pickup, dynamic bib assignment, live results, and a bunch of other things you may or may not be currently doing on race day. The reality is you can run your race without all these things. Sure, you'll miss a bunch of people who want to register on race day, and maybe check-in will be slower, and maybe you'll be left with a bunch of bibs you don't use at the end of the day. But really, why let that happen? Technology has moved so far these days that you can have all the same tools and conveniences a 10,000 or 20,000 or 40,000 person race has for your race, whatever the size of your race, and at no extra cost to you or your participants. With Give Sign Up, Run Sign Up, you get a fully integrated platform with email marketing, race day registrations, streamlined check-in, dynamic bib assignment, live results. I could go on, and you get all that as part of your standard registration cost. Do you have a good reason why your participants have to queue for an extra 15 minutes to check in? Or why you should be processing paper registration forms on race day instead of just scanning a QR code on someone's mobile phone? Why do your participants have to wait for hours or a day even for the race results? You don't have to live with all that. You can, but you don't have to. Check out Give Sign Up, Run Sign Up by visiting runsignup.com and take your next race to the next level with free integrated tools from sign up to race day. Really, do have a look. It will literally change the way you see things and do things. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed the first half of our chat with Crisp. That was preparing for race day. Now let's jump into race day itself with some great tips on running a smooth, stress-free race. So we've made it into race day morning. You show up at the race site. What's the first thing you would do? Would you get your team together and brief them? Like what kinds of things would you cover first thing?
So my actual first thing on race morning is I actually just have this personal moment of zen at a race site first thing in the morning. And that is before many other people get there, before my staff gets there, before athletes and volunteers get there. It's just this, I don't know, maybe it's just years of doing it, but it's just this peaceful moment that it's quiet and my coffee is hot and, I've done the work, and it's kind of like as an athlete, I guess, towing the line or showing up to the race site with the expectations of how the day is going to go. And I just take a moment personally to go through in my head how I want the day to go. As an athlete, I did a lot of visualizations. And as a race director, I do similar things just to kind of put me in a good place mentally. And then, shortly thereafter, my team shows up and we go through the plan of attack for that morning and just double check to make sure nobody has any questions. Usually my day starts out with everyone working together on a common task, like a big task that needs to be handled, whether it's, powering everything up and getting, lights and power to all the different things. And it also just kind of reminds everybody that we're all there together. And it lets me know that everybody's there. Because, if everybody dispersed immediately, I might not be aware that, we're missing someone, which is rare on the staff side, but it can happen from time to time. And then, as soon as that happens, we do have kind of a task matrix that we talked about previously, that everybody knows what everybody's supposed to be doing. And so on that task matrix, step one is, everyone's there. And so we can start doing step one. And from there, everybody kind of disperses out and starts on their own specific tasks.
Right.
And then the day kind of morphs from there.
Yeah. And I think we're going to be sharing a link to a sample of your task matrix in the show notes, because I think it's quite helpful to people. Just to describe it, basically, you have the first column is sort of date timestamps, right? So when things need to happen. The second column is what needs to happen. And then you have a separate column, I guess, for each of the team leads, or for smaller races, the individuals who would be doing that task. So that basically everyone knows the order in which things need to happen, what needs to happen, and who's taking care of that explicitly.
Correct. Yep. And people might end up working together on things. And as we talked about before, it's so everybody knows what's going on, but also so everybody knows if they finish early, where they can help. And obviously, if it says, at 5:05 a.m., go set the course, and somebody else is, at the start line, they're not going to be going out to set the course because they physically can't get out there, or don't need to be away because in 10 minutes they need to be doing something else. But it might be that they see, packet pickup's being set up. And so they can go over and help with that setup process.
Mm-hmm. What's your formal opinion on keeping an actual headquarters? You mentioned like the command center earlier. Is that a good idea to basically, have like a fixed physical point where you and some core team members may be, and where you would be expected to be found by other people? Is there value in that?
There can be. As a race director, I no. So I do feel like the race director should always be able to be located, and that might be somewhere in between the start and the finish line, with the idea that the start and finish are in the same general area. Point-to-point race might be a little bit different, but I am also on that matrix so that my team knows where I am. And the expectation is that the race director is reachable, and you can physically see me. If you are the race director, especially on smaller events, and like I said, you don't have a job, you just say where you're going to be, but you need to be prepared to do anything and everything. I've taken out trash, I've unclogged toilets, I've moved porta potties, I've helped with packet pickup. I've helped because it's where is there an issue and how can I solve the issue? And in some scenarios, you have resources like additional volunteers that you can ask to go handle these things. In other scenarios, you do not have those, especially in smaller events usually. And so there's no help for you just to complain about not having more volunteers. You go handle it because it needs to be handled by a specific time. So but at the same time, you're not going out on course. You're not disappearing. And that's one thing that I see with a lot of new race directors or smaller race directors. They do try to do too much. They overextend themselves. They are gone. And I work with those race directors a lot as a timer. And guess who is stuck answering race-related questions? And that's us. So you ask, where is this headquarters for the day? And a lot of times it's the finish line tent, the timing tent. And that's not to say that the race director needs to sit underneath the timing tent, but it's a good focal point for where someone is. Because think about, as a race director, if you are a race director, think about if you went to go find your timer and you went to the finish line and nobody's there. You kind of like, oh goodness, where's our timer? So, and granted, timers have to go use a restroom and things like that. So if they step away, usually they'll let a volunteer or something like that know briefly. But it's the same kind of goes for the race director. You don't necessarily need to have a physical headquarters, but they should know where you are, and you should stay in that area. Now, in the times where you do have like a mobile command center, the race director is rarely in that command center. What happens is people have two-way radios or shortwave radios or ham radios or what have you, and so now there's a communication path to reach all of these people. And so again, just going back to, you are reachable. You have your phone on you. You have a radio on you, and sometimes multiple radios on you on different channels, because you might have an emergency channel, you might have a race ops channel, and you might have a volunteer channel. And so there's other scenarios as the events, again, grow in size, where you quite literally have an assistant. And that way you walk around with purpose, and this other person walks around with all of your communication devices. And they might filter out a lot of that information as to whether or not you need to be like if that information is pertinent enough for you to address. And so like someone needs to be picked up at mile fill in the blank. Maybe you don't need to turn around as the race director. You don't need to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, the chief of police needs to talk with you. Boom, they're handing you a phone, or they're handing you that VHF radio to speak with that person. And so again, it changes with type of event, or size of event, or what resources you have available. But I don't necessarily think you have to have a physical race headquarters. You just need to be reachable and be in a general area.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the modes of communication with the rest of the team, you mentioned phones, you mentioned radios. I know lots of people, it's been discussed in our group before, have moved on to using WhatsApp, particularly because, as you say, with messaging, you can have like multiple people sending you stuff without, like clattering the phones. What's a good way of handling all that these days? What kind of combination of devices and channels would you use to communicate with people on the field?
Cell phones, VHF radios, two-way radios, ham radios. Again, it kind of depends on what you have available to you. Because, ideally, everyone has a two-way radio that you can communicate in every single part of the event space, from the turnaround all the way to the start finish, and everywhere in between. That's the ideal scenario, because then you're communicating amongst yourselves, and that's usually the best. The reality is that's not available most times, because even if you buy like a very nice commercial Motorola two-way VHF or radio, you can't reach that far because you don't have a repeating network. Which is where those command centers come in, because they'll place repeaters out and they have a stronger signal and things like that. And they manage that communication network at your event site. So those are helpful. They also have their limitations as well, partly because they're usually being used for fire, EMS, police, and whatnot. So as a race, you might not have access to use that technology. What everybody does have at this point are phones and, text groups, WhatsApp, whatever, that works quite well. You just need to make sure that your team has a phone, which most people do, and that it's charged, and you're not going to lose communication at some point on your course. I've done plenty of races where everything's great up until the farthest away point, and then there's no towers out there. Or if you're up in even a mountainous area where it's not remote, but just a mountainous region, like Asheville, North Carolina, for instance, you might have great communication on one side of this bike course, and you go around the bend and your cell tower's blocked. And so you no longer can communicate by phone to that person 5 miles away around the bend. So it really depends on where you are. Usually also with some of those phones, especially with like iMessaging and WhatsApp, you can pull that onto your computer as well. So you can have someone as kind of a communication station if you do have that HQ scenario, whether it be at packet pickup or at the finish line, that somebody can be monitoring that on a computer, which is a little bit easier to communicate via text.
Well, and again, I think with particularly with things like radios, going back to the principle of testing things before race day, you would want to just, go around at different parts of the course and try to communicate with other parts of the course and make sure that you don't have any dead spots or, being unable to get through to people at different points of the map, right?
A lot of times your timers will know that as well. If they're putting out a split in those locations, I know when we're going out to a new site and we have splits all over the place, we will actually take test equipment out to test signal strength for remote communication to our decoders. And so if you're not sure and you do have a timer that's gone out and checked that, you could reach out and ask them what service was like at those locations. I personally would probably go out and check myself because most timers are using like IoT cards and not voice cards. And so they might have a different communication path than you would. But checking that is really important, especially if you have someone in a remote location.
So let's move on to, I have a couple of really specific areas about race day that give people lots of headaches that I wanted to get your thoughts on. One is check-in, and it's check-in and race day registrations. So lots of people, it seems, get a little bit intimidated by the prospect of continuing to take registrations on the day. They feel that that they can't handle that on race day. And from what I understand, it's a bit of a missed opportunity because particularly for some of the smaller distance races, you get lots of people just walking in and signing up for the race or could potentially do so. So first question is keeping registrations open on race day worth it? And how many people, like if you have any idea on that, how many people take that option? And from my point of view as a race director, if I wanted to keep race day registrations open, what do I need from a technology point of view, from a resource point of view? What do I need to think about?
So I would start with yes, it's definitely worth it. The reason being, on average, I see, especially for smaller events now, so let's not necessarily focus on your 5,000 person event, but a 1 to 500 person 5K. When we're 1 month out, we expect somewhere around a doubling of total registrations. So, which some people might think, oh, that's not that many, but it is. You are doubling your numbers in the last 4 weeks. Now, that being said, in the last week, we would expect somewhere around 25% more people to register in the last week. How many people on race day? It's kind of all over the place, dependent on your location, your distance, your weather. So it's very dependent on what is actually going on race day and where you are. You might not have that many on race day specific. However, any time that you're turning off registration is a missed opportunity, in my opinion. And a lot of races, and this is not specifically what you asked, but it causes a problem that we are talking about. And that is, a lot of people will say, oh, well, we're going to shut off registration on Wednesday of race week.
Mm-hmm.
And that will allow us to prepare things for Thursday of race week for a Friday packet pickup. And at packet pickup at, let's just make it up, 3 p.m. on Friday, we start packet pickup and all these people show up for race day registration. And so in your head as a race director, you're like, oh my gosh, there's just so many people that want to walk up and register. Well, that's not necessarily the case. I look at registrations as like a flow. So let's talk about it as like a garden hose. So the water is just coming through. And on Wednesday, you crimp that hose. and the same amount of water, or even more potentially, because like we talked about, 25% of people are trying to register race week. So now you've crimped the hose. So what happens when you crimp a hose and you leave the water turned on? As soon as you uncrimp it, it explodes out. So same thing on Friday or Saturday at Packet Pickup for on-site registration. So the moment you start shutting that down, you've got all these people that are going to do one of two things. They're going to pile up and wait for registration to open, or they're going to find something else to do. One of the two. And neither help you that much as a race director, because you've either lost an athlete or now you're overloading your volunteers on this very small period of time, those 3 or 4 hours at Packet Pickup on Friday or on race morning where you might have 90 minutes. And those athletes are wanting the same race experience as everybody else that registered, 3 or 4 months ago. So leaving online registration open allows you to never crimp that hose. Now, it does provide additional challenges. So one being, as a race director, if you're looking to go down this path, you need to communicate with your timer. And that's a hard stop. You've got to have this conversation with your timer and say, hey, can you handle this? Are you able to get this data in? Because if you don't have internet access at your race site, whether it be 3G or a MiFi or something like that, then yeah, you need to leave online registration off. It is not going to work if you can't register or if you can't pull this data down. And so the timer also needs to be able to pull this data in. So maybe they don't have a direct link into your registration platform, but you have the ability to pull this information down onto a thumb drive and hand it to the timer, and they can import it into their scoring software. So all of these are viable options. At Run Signup, we have a great solution in that you can bidirectionally sync all of this registration information into the check-in app. And then if the timer is using Race Director or Race Day Scoring, they can pull it down seamlessly. You don't have to have a runner or anything like that. So it works really, really well. And other platforms have similar tools. It's just the tools that we happen to use. But you need to talk, like if you don't mention this to your timer and you show up on race day and say, oh yeah, we still have registration open and there's no Wi-Fi on site, you're going to run into a world of problems because there's no way for you or the timer to pull this data down. And people have registered that morning and no one knew. So a conversation needs to be had with what the plan is for all of this to work together. The technology works very, very well, but everybody has to be on board and everyone needs to understand how to use it. On the Run Signup side, again, we have a lot of training for these race day tools. And I do a lot of that training, but we've also produced a lot of videos and things like that you can learn how to do it. So it is quite helpful. And the athlete experience, the benefit, in my opinion, is the athlete experience because yeah, it might be a headache for the race director on some things. It might be a headache for the timer on some things. But at the end of the day, we don't matter. It's about the athlete experience. And so being able to allow someone to wake up at 6 a.m., say, hey, I want to participate. They go onto their phone and register just like somebody did, 6 months ago. And now they've signed the waiver. All your finances or your financial reports are in the same place. So you as a race director, a week from now, can run those financial reports and that person is included. If you have sales tax or anything like that in your area, it's all been taken care of. So it's not something you're worried about because if you're taking cash on site, theoretically, you need to be prepared to pay sales tax on that. Now, I know a lot of people don't, but it is something you need to be aware of. And then in terms of check-in, it dumps all of those people into the database, which the check-in app is pulling from. And so they don't have to go stand in a separate line or have a separate procedure. If your online registration platform allows for inventories, it also does manage their expectation in advance of whether or not they're going to get the t-shirt size they want, which could really change their attitude on race day. When they know that there's no shirts available and they have to select a no shirt option, they know they're not getting a shirt. They're not showing up angry. They selected that. You can show them where they selected that. And so again, it really sets a tone for how their day is going to go because that late registration is going to be treated just like an early registration. Everyone's getting into line the same way. It's just they maybe had to pay more. Now, what do you need on site? If you're going to provide kiosk, you need Wi-Fi on site. You need Chromebooks on site. You don't necessarily need laptops. You could have laptops, but refurbished Chromebooks are a lot easier, cheaper options. And especially if you're registering online. If you need to run specific programs for that, you would need a laptop. But in most scenarios, you wouldn't. That wouldn't be the case. If the timer doesn't have a way to pull this data down, you'd need a USB drive or something like that to physically take this information over. Otherwise, you're left with that runner that is taking paper registration forms over the timer. And a lot of timers these days charge extra for manual data entry. So just because all of these other options are on the table.
And am I correct in thinking that if you want to keep registrations open, so-called dynamic bib assignment is a sort of like must-have for managing your bibs?
Not necessarily. It's a great option. What you can do if you leave online registration open, you can have an automatic bib assignment. With Run Sign Up, for instance, there's an automatic bib assignment by registration date. And so when you turn that on, you can set the bibs in advance of whatever you want it to be, alphabetized or what have you by age. You can import them, and then you can set up everyone after that fact to being the next bib available. And that way, if I'm at home and I wake up at 6 a.m. and I'm the 700th person to register, I would get bib number 700, or I would get bib number 1700, whatever my bib sequence is. And so when I show up, my bib is assigned. You can also do it, like you mentioned, with the dynamic bib assignment, which, in my opinion, is a great tool to use. Again, it's something that you do need to talk with your timer about, because if they don't have the ability to pull this data down, you're going to run into issues. But dynamic bib assignment speeds up the packet pickup process immensely. And that's because you're not telling everyone to get in line by their bib number or by their last name or whatever. You're just saying fine, because what happens in those situations is, let's say you have a 1,000-person event and you have 6 lines or 8 lines or something like that for packet pickup, and everyone from a family shows up. My last name is McDonald, so everyone shows up in my family. There's 20 of us, so we all get into the McDonald line, the MC or the M line, and now the one line is completely overloaded and nobody else is there. And so you have complete lines that are bored, and you have these 2 or 3 or 4 people that are working as hard as they possibly can to thumb through bibs or thumb through packets and find the different people in my group. Whereas with dynamic bib assignment, you can have people go in any line. We can all spread out, 2 or 3 people per line, and we can be managed one at a time. And the longest we have to wait is for 2 other people, because a third person's only behind 2 people. Whereas the longest somebody had to wait there was 15, 20 minutes, because there's 25 people ahead of us. And so it really, really speeds up. It like amortizes the work across everyone rather than having one specific line get overloaded. And also, you're expecting a 12 to 17% no-show rate on average at your events. You can probably go back and look. I know our app at Run Sign Up, you can run reports after the fact, and you can run year-over-year reports as to when people checked in, how many people didn't check in. And so you can build expectations for your team for next year's event. And so how many people aren't going to check in. I know for a fact some events have hard caps of, like, let's say 500 due to space. They also know that they're going to have a 15% no-show rate. So they might oversell their event by 10%, because they know for a fact, even at a 10% overage, actual people showing up on site, they're still going to have 5% under cap. And so they don't have to worry about issues on site with those actual in-person caps. So it allows them to over-register slightly and bring in more revenue. And then they can also scale those apps very, very quickly in case they do see a number of people show up at once. Additional people can jump in, kind of like we talked about earlier, with volunteers that don't have anything to do, or team members that have finished their other tasks. those people can jump in and scale up very quickly because there's no lines for specific names or bib numbers.
And actually, I was talking to a race director here in the UK the other day, and he was telling me that now that races are coming back, and I can't expect it would be any different in the US. Those no-show rates they've gone up to almost like 30% in some cases, because it's a much more volatile season and people are not turning up, and you definitely don't want you don't want to be left with 30% of bibs being unused and that kind of thing, right?
I would agree 100% with those no-show rates for 2021. However, I think that there's a different reason behind those elevated no-show rates. It's not singularly on what's going on right now. It's that so many athletes are deferrals from last year. And so I do think those numbers will drop back down to our normal rates in 22 and later in this year, because the later we get into 2021, the less likely registration was open for a very long time in 2020. And so we had some events that were at the end of 2020, and their no-show rates were up to 50%. And early this year, we saw them kind of holding in this 30%, like you were mentioning. And as has gone on, that number has been kind of steadily dropping back down. And here in the South, we're kind of seeing it stabilize back to where it was. And part of the reason is because here in September and October, races hadn't been, when COVID hit last year, it was March. So in March of 2020, not all of our races for like, say, Thanksgiving were open at that point. And so they weren't worried about deferring people over, because at no point, they might have held an event last year, but it was virtual. And so they don't have this huge deferral group coming over. So if your event did have deferrals, yes, you're going to expect a much higher no-show rate because people just aren't going to show up.
And moving to packet pickup, actually, I think from a discussion we had the other day, I think contrary to what people might think, you also favor a kind of lean, just-in-time kind of approach to packet pickup and assembling all the stuff you need to do for the packets, right? Similar to dynamic bib assignment. So you're not very much in favor of pre-packing stuff.
It's kind of two different schools of thought there, and if you're mailing everything out in advance, if you're mailing out packets, then you're putting everything together in advance for those mailouts. But my personal opinion on packet pickup is leave the variables out, like in regards to, like, the bib number is a variable unit. So I'm not going to put the bib number into a bag. And we a lot of times do dynamic bib assignment. So those bibs are going to be sitting out. T-shirts. T-shirts are another variable unit. You might get large and I might get an extra large. So if we start packing these bags, it's a lot easier to transport boxes of larges folded or unfolded and boxes of extra larges versus packets with prepackaged shirts and things like that. And a lot of people will argue, well, yeah, it speeds up the packet pickup process. I don't disagree with you on some end. That's if it's a very quick handoff. But if you have to transport these things fall out and whatnot, like, how long does it take to put a t-shirt into a bag live? So in many cases, what we do at a normal run is we'll have the bib number in front of the person checking people in, and we'll have boxes of pre-assembled bags that have all the sponsor stuff and things like that. The goodies that are going into the bag are prepackaged, and those are sitting there. And then the t-shirts are spread, across the table in different areas of size. And you might have a runner that's in charge of smalls. And so you would, the person checking somebody in would say, okay, the next bib is number 123. So you're assigning bib number 123 to that person. They'll turn around and say, I need a medium. And now the shirt person grabs a bag, puts a medium in, hands it to the person in front, who puts the bib in, and hands it to the person. And so it's a very quick process. I mean, there's other events that are enormous that the shirts don't fit in the same location. So those shirts are getting picked up later down the line. Maybe if you're in an expo area of a stadium, there might be the next set of tables over after you pass through the sponsors, and so that's managed slightly differently. But when we talk to races, we're, as much as everyone wants to say, they are a 5,000 person race. The reality is most races fall into that 100 to 500 person range, and that's not insulting anyone. It's just kind of where the average race size is, and with race sizes around there, that packet pickup method is very effective.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a good qualification to mention size of race, because maybe if you are the 5,000 person race, spending that time assembling that stuff before race day may make some sense. But if you are the 100 to 200, which, as you say, is the bulk of races, and again, no issue with that, and all races are great events regardless of size. Maybe it does make sense at that point to just assemble them on site, right? To just be a little bit more nimble that way.
Yeah, well, and a lot of the big races don't pre-assemble. It's just in a completely different area. It might be in a completely different room, or 20 yards away, where you have to take your bib, and they do like a hole punch or something like that to confirm that you picked up your shirt size. So it's, or you turn in a ticket or something like that. Again, there's no point in spreading things out for a smaller event. You're just diluting resources. But once you get to the point where you do need to spread things out, that's, it makes complete sense that you would have the shirts farther away, so that way you can keep people checking in and move them through. But if you look at how the big races do it, you're basically doing the same thing at a smaller race in handing that shirt out individually. You're just doing it all at once, because there's no need to have everything on, different tables or down the line. Everything fits right here. If you go to a 10,000 person race, you physically can't fit the t-shirts behind you, more than likely, unless you're in a huge gym or a stadium or something. So it might be that they're going to store them over on this other area.
Is mailing packets sort of like falling out of fashion these days? I know it has its pitfalls, right? I mean, people show up, no bibs, no timing chips. It's things can go wrong. But are people doing less packet mailings than they used to?
To be honest, I mean, I'd be willing to bet that there's more packet mailings right now than there used to, just because there are still a lot of restrictions due to COVID guidelines, and if you can mail something, then there's less, human to human contact, and with the advent of UHF tags, where they're disposable, you can easily affix the tag to the bib, and put safety pins, shirt, all that jazz in there, and have people show up and go. Like you said, there are pitfalls in that people lose their bibs or forget to bring it, or what have you, or your pick and pack could have gone a little wrong, and somebody gets the wrong shirt size and needs to get that traded out. The other side of this that a lot of people that are doing bib or packet mailings for the first time don't think through is your entire process for ordering shifts backwards, like earlier, for whatever day you need to receive things to begin preparing. So if your race is, say, on Thanksgiving Day, and normally you prep whatever you need to prep, like that Monday, and so that means you need to get everything delivered the Friday before, and so that means you need to order 3 weeks before that. Well, if you're mailing things and you're expecting these people to receive it and show up, you might need to give a week or a week and a half before that, so that everybody receives. Now, we're not talking about virtual events. We're talking about, like, they're actually physically coming to the race. They need to receive those before race day, days before. So you ensure things. And the logistics side of shipping and receiving right now is questionable. So you really do want to give a little bit of extra time for people to receive things. So you might be backing up your ordering process 2 weeks, which means now you have to project your orders 2 weeks further out, which, again, we've already talked about. you're in a smaller event, 50% of your registrations are coming in the last month, and you've just pushed things out 2 more weeks. And so you really have to get good at projecting if you're mailing things out. Otherwise, you're going to run out of stuff. But there are pitfalls, but there are benefits, especially in the COVID world, with getting things out to people without them having to come to packet pickup and be exposed to others and stuff like that.
So let's spend a little bit of time on course setup and teardown. And specifically for your typical road race where you need to do a number of things on race day, not all of which take the same amount of time and some of which sort of are conditioned on others, what kind of order would you do things in setting up a course and then tearing it down?
So we get our, again, depending on distance and size of the race, most of the times we get the start finish lines set up first. We kind of joke about the idea of no one wants to see what the guy underneath the Mickey Mouse head actually looks like, because it takes away the magic. And so we feel kind of the similar way about the race, in that we really would like to have the start and finish areas set up before the bulk of athletes show up, so that the race still has that magic feel, because most people that are participating never consider what it took to get everything set up. They're just taking those pictures before the race, even underneath the finish line or next to a clock or something like that. And so we try to get all of that set up in advance. And part of that is also because that's a lot of times where heavier things are, that needs more hands, more muscle, more man hours to get everything set up. And then at that point, we kind of split or divide and conquer once all of that's done to people setting up timing equipment, people setting up the course, and people setting up packet pickup on site. So that all happens simultaneously. And usually as the race director, because again, we time in-house, I'm usually getting notifications from my team as to what they've completed at certain marks along the course. Just like you want to know where the athletes are on the course, where's my first guy, where's my last guy? I like to know where my team is on the course as time goes on. That way I need to know if I have to look up jokes or something like that to tell on the microphone at the starting line. I'm joking about that. But the idea that you might have to hold things up so that everything's completed, and hopefully that's not the case, but things can go awry. Like we had an event in March where half a mile in on the course, we had a train parked across both certified courses. And so here we are, probably 2 hours before a 5K, 10K, and we have to go create 2 new courses, 2 new 5K, 10Ks. And so timer, race director get together, they sit down, they pull up Google Maps, they start mapping things out, and it's like, okay, I think this is going to work. And now the communication plan goes into place with the athletes, like, hey, things are going to be different, nothing's certified, we're doing our best. And we made it all work. We started 5 minutes late. Having good staff helps a lot, and having a plan in place just in case helps a lot. But once you actually get to the course setup itself, pre-marking in that train situation wouldn't have helped, but pre-marking, if possible, helps your staff if they're not as familiar with the course, because they can double check that, oh, mile 1 does go here. It says mile 1. Because at a certified course, you might have pins dropped, and those are where things need to go. So, putting cones out in advance, like way in advance before your team goes out, helps them see things because it's probably going to be dark. Making sure they have course maps, making sure they have, we used to print out all the course maps for the staff. Now we email it. Because again, going back to the phones, everyone has a phone now. And then getting everything set up on a shorter race, you're basically going to have starters and finishers almost at the same time. So the entirety of the course needs to be set up before you say go. Longer distance races, like if we're talking about like a half iron distance triathlon, the entirety of the run course is probably not set up when you start the swim, because even if you've got pro athletes, you've got several hours to go before the first person gets out onto the run course. And if you put all the ice and stuff like that out there, it's just going to melt. So it depends. The course setup and everything like that depends on the timeline of your event day. And we do a lot of calculations at our events as to what our expectations are for the fastest and slowest people. Like in terms of race director, it's kind of wild. You only really care about, in terms of course, two people, your fastest and your slowest, because everybody else is in between. And so everybody needs to be treated the same. And so doing those calculations and figuring out when your first person is going to pass certain points and when your last person, sending that out to police, sending that out to the city managers, stuff like that can really help out with planning processes and getting notifications from your team out on course where those people are. If you're not using like remote splits or, RaceJoy style tracking. And then for the teardown side, we use a rolling teardown strategy. And that is, let's say you're doing a big loop that never goes back on itself for a 5K. We start the race, everybody's on course, and about 7 minutes or so, we give everybody a head start, but 7 minutes or so later, we send our team back out to begin tearing down. We never want to catch that last person, so sometimes we'll drive incredibly slowly or park for a bit. But that way, when the last person crosses the finish line, my team is normally, sometimes 100 yards away, sometimes half a mile away, but they have torn things down so that the city can open back up or the event space can open back up. And we have less of an impact on the greater traffic patterns of the event. And also our team gets to go home earlier. So that's a huge plus for our guys because a lot of times we don't get paid by the hour, they get paid for the event. Other people do it hourly. It's kind of a decision you have personally. Most people want to wrap it up as soon as they possibly can. So they're not going to complain about having the course cleared before the award ceremony happens.
And then you've got your course cleared. Makes a lot of sense to do it on a rolling basis. Really important thing after that, I guess, still plenty to do, is getting race results out to people on time. Mm-hmm. So going back to dynamic bib assignment, technology has made some significant strides in that. It's lots of people these days, even on smaller events, they've come to expect results to be delivered to them by email, by text, pretty soon after they finish the race. What kind of technologies and setups do I need on the ground to be able to deliver all that to people?
As a race director, you need to find a solid timer if you're not timing in-house. So, and most race directors aren't timing in-house. And for the race directors that have a good timer and see what they do and think to themselves, oh, yeah, they just click some buttons and it's easy. It's a very, very stressful thing, and it looks easy because the person doing it is pretty good at it. Yeah, and as a timer, how do you do it? Number one, you're going to really want internet connection if possible. And at bare minimum, you're going to want to make sure that your data stream is live, it's coming in, you're assessing the data in real time and not waiting until everyone finishes. And then ideally, you're using your internet connection and your scoring platform to live push those results up to the web. Again, we use Run Sign Up quite a bit, if not exclusively, and we push all of our results live back up to Run Sign Up through Race Day Scoring. And the beauty of that is we have the ability to live text and email athletes. I think it usually takes about 30 to 45 seconds after they finish that they get a text and email notification through the Run Sign Up system. They do have to opt in. That is a requirement in the US. But other than that, it's a really seamless process. But one big thing, and we've talked about this a lot internally with other timers, and that is as a timer, testing your reports and testing to make sure everything's going to come through like you want it to. A lot of race directors look at the timer almost as a magician because all of this stuff just happens. And as a timer, don't look at yourself as a magician. It's not just happening. You do need to test things out. You do need to make sure your reports are clean and they're good, putting test data in, double checking that if you're doing a live pull down of data, that it is connected and it is working. If you're doing a CSV import, getting a test CSV file and pulling that in to make sure everything pulls the way you want it to. Double checking with your race director to make sure that the specific age groups, overall awards, and any special categories are in and present the way people want. And, if there's double dipping, that's set up. If there's prize money, that the prize money is set up in the appropriate hierarchy. As the timer, there's just a lot of pieces to that puzzle to make everything work well. It takes a lot of equipment to do it. I mean, having good timing equipment, having a stable internet connection, having a reliable scoring platform, understanding how it all works together with the registration database. And it's daunting at first, but practicing and testing goes a really long way. And as a timer, I always kind of feel like I'm having a good day when I get to sit back and either drink a soda or drink a coffee and have a conversation. And it's not a great day, or maybe not a great day, but it's a hard day when I don't get to have any conversations and I'm face down on the computer typing feverishly to make everything work, which is the way some days go. You can plan out everything and you still have that human element of, I wore my daughter's bib, and then I just won overall female because, so it just, things happen. And you, as the timer, you need to be very prepared for it.
Yeah. I mean, things would be too boring otherwise. I mean, you need
Exactly.
you need a little bit of excitement.
Right.
Race is wrapped up. Do you, with your team, do any kind of like formal debriefing? People coming together, sharing stories of incidents, stuff like that. Do you even like document stuff formally? Do you do race reports, stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag on these things. A lot of times what I'll do as the race director is I'll touch base with my leads and kind of say on day of, how did your day go? Like, how did it go? And I don't want to, everything was great. I really want to, what worked and what didn't work. And if the general consensus is it was good, we had your normal, like, so-and-so ran the wrong way because they didn't listen to the 5 volunteers, course markings, barricades, all of these things. We're not going to waste time and energy on somebody just not paying attention. But if we had other issues with maybe traffic control or something like that, we're going to have those conversations with the officers in real time. And I also make it a point to touch base with that lead officer. How was your day? How did it go? And they really appreciate that. A lot of times they'll turn around and hopefully tell you that it was a very well-run event. They didn't have any issues. Sometimes they'll say, look, we had some problems at this intersection. And we'll make a note of it and say, okay, do you have any ideas right now? Like, no, but we can talk about it. And usually we'll do a debrief later if we need to reassess that specific intersection or whatever happened. And it might mean that the course needs to change. And then in terms of medical, we absolutely do debriefs with medical. If there were any medical issues, a number of insurance companies require you to put together an injury report, even if it's a null value, that you didn't have any injuries and that they shouldn't be expecting any claims or anything like that through the event insurance. So yes, we definitely do it on the safety side, especially with, like, say, triathlons where you're going to touch base with the lifeguards and or on your swim lead, like how many people were pulled from the water, were there any issues, things like that, because we do report all of that back to national governing bodies. And then, if there were any medical issues, do you as a race director need to reach out personally to make sure everything's fine? And it's, not the worst move to just see if everything's okay with that person, because things do happen and we're all human, and it's good to have that personal interaction with the athlete.
Indeed. Well, Crisp, I think we've been chatting for a while, and I can't thank you enough. Actually, I know how horrendously busy you are with so many hats you're wearing. I want to thank you very, very much for the time you spend with us. I'm sure our listeners, would be furiously writing down tips from on all kinds of things. Before we go, how can people reach out to you in terms of the stuff you do with your event production and timing business, and in your capacity as like the run sign up race day expert? How can people get in touch with you?
Email is probably the best, and that's crisp at goraceproductions.com. And on the race day side with Run Sign Up, crisp at runsignup.com.
Perfect. Any last words to aspiring race directors going into race day, feeling a little bit, sometimes when we do these episodes with so many tips, I get to sort of like get stuck on how helpful they are. But I guess they can also be a little bit intimidating, particularly to some junior people, hearing all of these many, many things that they need to sort of like keep on top of. Any last encouraging words for people?
Sure. I would just suggest if you're an athlete and you're a new race director, you need to wear a different hat. You're not going to be an athlete on race day. You're going to be on the event production team. And so find some events to go volunteer and see it from the other side and experience what other events are doing. No one's going to, you're not stealing intellectual property or anything like that. You're helping out an event, you're learning, you're growing as a race director, and then talk to other race directors and see how they're doing things, what they would suggest. Make sure you over communicate with your athletes, make sure you over communicate with your leads, not to the tune of micromanaging things, but just stay in touch. It's very important to have those open lines of communication, and then just take a deep breath. It's acutely stressful morning. And I think the goal for most of us in the race directing business is to have the biggest impact in the community throughout the entirety of the year, and to have the smallest impact on the community on race day, like the smallest footprint. And so just trying to hold a safe, fun event and wrap it up on race day, and then have the biggest impact for the rest of the year on the community, whether it be with running groups or donations or empowering people to get to your finish line. And then just generally just having fun. Like if you're not having fun doing this, well, why are you doing it? Like you've got to take a step back and make sure you're having fun doing it. So it's a lot, but it can be really, really rewarding. And it's definitely a different path to take as either a volunteer position or as a profession, for sure.
Absolutely. And it shows with people like you having been in this through thick and thin for so many decades now. Crisp, thanks again very, very much for all your time and all these amazing tips. Thanks to everyone who had the patience to sit through these couple of hours with us. I will see everyone on our next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode on preparing for race day with Race Day Ninja Crisp McDonald. You can find more resources on anything and everything related to race directing on our website, racedirectorshq.com. You can also share your questions about race day prep or anything else in our Facebook group, Race Directors Hub. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe or leave a review on your favorite player. And also check out the podcast back catalog for more great content like this. Until our next episode, take care and keep putting on amazing races.